The opinions expressed on the radio program by the host, co-hosts, guests, and call-in listeners or chatters are solely the opinions and responsibility of the original source who expressed them. They do not necessarily represent the opinions of Gynesis Radio, www.gynesisradio.com, Gynesis Radio's owners, management, or affiliates.
Good evening and welcome to GynesisRadio.com. My name is Kendall Stevenson and I am the host of the Empowerment Show, which is a part of Unity in the Community. As always, we like to start off with a little something to be grateful for. So I'm just grateful for life. Waking up in the morning and taking a nice deep breath. I sit on the side of the bed and I say thank you, because so many things could go wrong during your time of sleep that you may not even wake up in the morning. So this evening we have a young lady with us today, and I do call her a young lady. Her name is Erin McClellan. Did I pronounce that right?
You did.
Okay. Why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself and who you are?
Sure. I'm currently running for Pennsylvania State Treasurer, so that's what's keeping me busy these days. I grew up in a little working class mill town in the outskirts of Allegheny County, where we actually still have a steel mill, and around steel workers. And I come from 4 generations of organized labor, so that's a big part of my background and my upbringing. I spent most of my career in health and human services, working in mental health and addiction recovery. Went on to start the first and only clinic of its kind in the state to treat mental health and drug and alcohol, and actually get it licensed. So that was something wonderful that we did. We got to be featured twice as a case study in Industrial Engineer magazine for the work that we were doing. I spent a year training under United States Treasury Secretary Paul O'Neill, who was a huge inspiration to me. And he was a systems analyst when he started out for government. So he taught me a lot about how we look at government and solve problems within it. And then I spent 9 years with Allegheny County Department of Human Services writing policy and doing process improvement for them.
Wow, that's a mouthful. It is. It's a mouthful. It was a pleasure to meet you, and it was a real pleasure to get an opportunity to hear you speak when I got that opportunity to do so, not too long ago. So let me ask you, what is the job of a state treasurer?
Yeah, it's a really important question, and one that I get very often. So your state treasurer manages about $163 billion here in Pennsylvania. 3 pensions. The PEASERS pension, which is your teacher's pension, your state workers pension, as well as your municipal and local workers pension. So that's a big part of the job. There's also the 529 savings accounts for our students to save money for higher education, and the PA ABLE program, which is a savings program that allows disabled folks to save money tax-free and be able to put it toward their needs and resources. There's also managing the medical marijuana fund, because medical marijuana is technically still illegal in the federal government. So we have to keep that money separate in case somebody would try to seize it someday and accuse the state of laundering drug money. So that's another thing we have to manage. In addition to that, the state treasurer puts out contracts for the state and decides how those look and keeps track of all of your state contracts. So that's a system that I think right now looks very antiquated. And I think there's a lot we can do to innovate that. And, we can list if these businesses are small businesses, medium or large, how many employees they have, if they are union or non-union, if they are minority-owned businesses or they are women-owned businesses. These are all things that I think are important for the taxpayers to know about how we're spending their money. So that's just a few of the things that the state treasurer does. And recently, the National Association of State Treasurers has suggested that the increasing cybersecurity threats that are affecting people throughout the country and our municipalities is the responsibility of the state treasurer. So your state treasurer has a cybersecurity program. There's not a lot of sophistication in local government when you're looking at small boroughs and townships. They need a lot of support. They don't have a lot of resources. So we feel, and the National Association feels, that it is the obligation of the treasurer to take that on and lead the charge. And in the past 6 to 9 months, we've seen multiple cybersecurity attacks on small municipalities all throughout the state, costing an exorbitant amount of money and definitely putting people in harm's way. You had the Aliquippa Water Authority was hacked by Iran.
Wow.
The Washington County entire government was shut down due to a ransomware attack that cost them $350,000, and Chester lost $400,000 due to a phishing attack. And I know in Allegheny County, where I live, we've had a number of attacks on our DA's office, throughout DHS. This is an ongoing thing, and I feel that it is very, very urgent. We need to get support and guidance and sort of an alert system to every municipality in the state, and that's 2,559. So they need our help.
Wow. You have seems like you have a big hat to wear, a lot of responsibilities going on there. So now we talked about a little bit what you do. So why do you do it?
Why do I want to be treasurer?
Yeah. Why do you want to be you? This isn't your first stop. You've had a career.
Yeah.
So this is where your career has led you to. What I want is why you do what you do. What's your passion?
Yeah, my passion is policy and process. Mm-hmm. So we hear people use the word systemic a lot. We say systemic this, systemic that. And what I have found is we throw that word around, and then we have people in charge that don't actually have any experience or understanding of how to do the needling down in government systems and make them work better. And that was my experience. And that's what Mr. O'Neill spent a lot of time teaching all of us that were working with him. And it was when I learned how to go into a healthcare setting and eliminate medical error at root cause, or eliminate work-related injury, work-related death at root cause, to the point that you could get to zero. And it's a very simple process using the scientific method, which we all learn in 4th grade. In 4th grade, we learn you have a hypothesis to the way a thing is. You actually look at that hypothesis, you exercise it, you look at your data and your results, and then you make modifications based on how correct you are in your hypothesis. This is not complicated stuff. And it makes for really great problem solving, specifically in government systems, where when you go to affect change, a lot of times when you're changing here, you can have sort of ripple effects in other systems that can be very damaging if you're not needling down properly. And I see a lot of that, and I find it frustrating. And for me, having that education and that extraordinary experience, I feel obligated to use it in a way that can really benefit the taxpayers, solve a lot of our problems, and really fix the state supply chain, make sure that we're reinforcing, labor laws, not buying from slave labor camps, things like that. There's so much opportunity using this methodology to go in and really reform the way we manage a treasury. And I've always wanted to see it done in government. And in 2020, Mr. O'Neill died on my birthday on April 18th. And I started really thinking long and hard about all the education I got and how far we were moving away from good data-driven systemic problem solving. And you feel compelled to bring that back to the table so we can get back to those days instead of solving problems on Twitter and 200 some characters or less, but actually really needling down and doing real reform. And that's my passion.
Well, you said systemic. Well, there are a lot of problems systemically within our community. Education and housing. How do you earmark or use your power as a treasurer to address these issues that they have? Education being one of the largest, and housing, I would say, number 2.
So I would say that one of the biggest things that we see in both education and housing, there's a similar problem that they have at their core that we never talk about. And that is the fact that the state of Pennsylvania does not have a standardized property tax assessment process for every county. That is a huge problem. If we are not requiring that everybody reassess property taxes in a uniform way in every county. You have counties that haven't done reassessments since the 70s. Well, if you are funding your schools and you are looking at how housing is taxed and how property values are assessed, and you're not doing that process on a regular basis to keep it uniform and to keep it, appropriate to where it should be, then it gets out of control. And that's where you start getting things like gentrification. And that affects our availability of affordable housing, which is a huge issue. It also makes it very, very hard to run a school district, especially in rural counties where you have a district that straddles more than one county. Imagine doing a budget for a school district that has two completely different tax processes for property taxes to generate the revenue that funds that school. So I would say that there is a number of issues that we have due to the fact that our property tax assessment process is absolutely ridiculous, not standardized, not uniform, and really not fair. And one of the things that you'll hear people say is that, well, we can't build in equity in property taxes because there's a constitutional requirement that it be equal for everybody. Well, there was an amendment done in the 90s by Vince Fumo that actually does allow us now to build in a different process for, let's say, seniors who are on a fixed income. If we're going to assess their property and raise their property rates, there's a way that we can do that in a way that takes into account that they're on a fixed income and their income is not going to increase, as well as in areas where you're seeing affordable housing go through the roof because, wealthier people are buying these houses, renovating them, and suddenly what was a $100,000 house becomes an $800,000 house, which we are seeing a ton of, especially in more of our urban areas and cities. So I would say that with those, the biggest thing I want to argue for as state treasurer is it's okay for us to come forward and do the tough, heavy lifting of passing legislation that requires a standardized property tax assessment process that is fair and equitable and can properly fund our schools and level out how we assess property values and ensure that we have affordable housing.
Well, I'll tell you, it seems that it should be that once a person reaches a certain age, that's the senior, it kind of seems like maybe we should get a break on property taxes.
Yeah. And the FUMO amendment allows us to do that now.
And has it been passed, or it's just
the FUMO amendment was passed I think it was 96. Don't quote me on that, but it was in the 90s. And yes, that passed and it's in the legislature. Now it needs enabling legislation and it needs the actual legislation to build that statewide property assessment process. And that's very time consuming. It's a lot of work. It's a heavy lift, but it needs to be done because we can't keep having county commissioners or county executives that are terrified to do a property tax assessment because they're afraid they're not going to get reelected. That's what's happening. They don't want to do a reassessment because they're afraid it's going to raise property taxes or hurt people or displace people. And so they just don't do it because they don't want to not be reelected. And we can't use that anymore. We have to do this heavy lift. We have to stabilize this system so it makes sense because it doesn't right now.
Well, it just seems to me that if rich people can get a tax break, it just seems like people that are seniors can maybe get a tax break too, maybe on those on property taxes. But I want to ask you about the farmers as well. Do you also handle? Because there's a lot of farmers in Pennsylvania, and they've been having quite a bit of issues, especially with the African American farmers.
Yeah, that's a huge problem, how we do property tax for farmers, because what happens is, so you have a lot of land, right? And some of these farms, they've owned for 100 years, right? They've been in their families for a very long time. So they have a lot of land, they have multiple buildings, they have equipment. And when you assess that value at more of a corporatized rate, the value is through the roof. But it doesn't really represent the value of the land or what's on it. It's elevated, escalated, and inflated in a way that's not really fair. And the worst part is, let's say a farmer passes and leaves that to his family, which is very common. The inheritance on that is treated like a corporation instead of something that's within your family, and it is just astronomically taxed. So yes, again, we have a very problematic way of how we look at taxing farms. That we're taxing that the same way we would tax a multi-billion-dollar hotel, that was built, somewhere. We're taxing it the same. And there needs to be a process to separate how a family farm is looked at versus a multinational corporation.
So what is the procedure that a person or people would have to go through in order to make any type of changes? I mean, other than electing you into that position, but what can me or what can the average person do to maybe help along?
I can advocate. I can't pass legislation as treasurer, unfortunately, at the federal level and federal tax or state. But what I can do as the person who's essentially what I believe is the CFO of the state and the top economic person, I believe that it is the obligation of the treasurer to speak out loud about these things. I think that you are paid by the taxpayers to weigh in and provide an intelligent argument on these things with some semblance of expertise. And I don't see that happening right now. And that's something that I really enjoy doing. It's something I would love to work with the legislature on, as well as working with members of Congress on, and work as an advocate for these things. But I can't actually change the tax code as the state treasurer. We don't get to write legislation, but we can certainly advocate for it.
And how is your camaraderie within the state? I mean, the legislature, I mean, if you wanted to get something passed, do you have any camaraderie? How willing and how open are they to accept the changes?
I would have to have that conversation after I get elected. I haven't had that conversation with any of the legislators yet. And we haven't really seen a lot of effort on that, but that doesn't, it would definitely be something that we have to start a conversation on and start to build legislation. But that would be something that we do after I get elected. Right now, I'm busy just running a campaign.
Well, between housing, the education, the property taxes, like I said, you wear a lot of hats and you have a lot of responsibility. So how much education did it take for you to get to where you are?
I have a master's degree in psychology, and the specialization that I worked in was industrial, organizational, and counseling psychology. So a lot of it was the psychology of how workers function in a group dynamic, as well as how behavior functions in big systems. So I think that's another reason I'm so fascinated by how government works and how groupthink works in government. I find the fact that there is a groupthink dynamic in government more so, I think, than in private industry, where there's an obligation to fall in line, to not speak out. There's not an emphasis on rewarding and cultivating bold, creative thought. There isn't an emphasis on creating a culturally sensitive workplace that makes it comfortable for people of color and women. I've actually been, in the 9 years I was in a public sector workforce, I was very discouraged by how much we stifle bold and creative thought, by how bad the turnover is for people of color and women. And what the sort of toxicity of a political environment can do to a workplace. So that's another thing that I'm very, very passionate about. And that's what I started in as somebody who comes from a very strong union background and a working class background. I believe that our ability to serve the people is only as good as the workers that do the people's work. If they can't do that good work, and they can't do it in a way that they are comfortable, where they feel that their work is valued, where they have the resources that they need to do that work, the training, the education, the guidance, and the support, then we don't actually get value for our taxpayers. And it's the idea of capturing value for every dollar. And if that $163 billion, that workforce is something that I take very personally as somebody that's been through that and has seen how it functions.
Paying taxes without any representation. Didn't we have a revolution about that?
Yeah, and unfortunately, DC still has taxation without representation.
That's what it seems like sometimes. Like we pay the taxes, but we don't get represented for it. So are you having a hard time with your campaign as a woman?
I mean, we always have challenges as women. I mean, this is a game created by men for men. There's no doubt about it. And when you get into it, you know that there are a different set of rules for you. You're going to be treated a little bit different, and you have to just duke it out. Like you'll never see me complain. You'll never see me say, "Oh, well, they're picking on me because I'm a girl," because that's what I signed up for. I didn't have to do this. I could have chose to stay in a very private life, but I feel passionate about what I believe in, and I'm willing to fight that fight. So no, I don't think I'm having trouble with my campaign at all. I think I came in very well prepared for what I was going to face. And I'm standing up for everything that I believe in. I'm not shy. I say my piece whenever there's something that happens that I think that I need to weigh in on and move forward. And I think overall, what I found in my primary and even now is voters want somebody that comes off sincere and is just going to tell them the truth, not toe the party line, not do what they're told, not be afraid to speak out and fight for people that can't fight for themselves. And I genuinely believe that regular voters want that.
Well, I saw you when I did see you. You had a lot to say about Kamala, and it was I enjoyed hearing you when you spoke about her. You know, it seems like she's having a little tough time with her campaign as of late. How you still feel about her now?
I'm very, very happy to have her on the ticket. I'm very excited about her. You know, I was on the ballot running for Congress in one of those really gerrymandered congressional districts in 2016 when Donald Trump first came on the scene. And I can tell you now that was a tough year to be a woman. That was a really, really rough year to be a woman on the ballot. Some of that has changed, not all of it. I think she's handling it way better than Hillary handled it. You know, she's learned to laugh and let stuff roll off her back. You know, Donald Trump has an interesting style to him, and I think she's handling him very, very well. I think she came into this race late with a lot of challenges, and I think she's working very hard to overcome them, specifically with people of color as well as young people. So I give her a lot of credit because coming in that late, the way that she did, that's not easy.
I can just tell you, I think a lot of people are giving her a really hard time. They're asking a lot of tough questions that I think they honestly should be asked to someone who was a president. And I even have to explain to some people that she wasn't the president, you know, that she was the vice president. So she was limited to what she can do and what she couldn't do.
Sure.
Yeah. So anyway, this is Hope Cressman. I believe you know each other.
Hi.
Hi, how are you?
I'm well. How are you?
I'm good. It was such a pleasure to see you at our banquet. You have so much energy.
Thank you.
Yeah. You know, Hope is running for
state rep in the 176th.
Yep.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And sometimes I guess we were talking about how tough it was. Well, it just came up anyway about how tough women may have it running in a campaign. But she was telling me she's a tough trooper, and she's not going to allow things like that to stand in her way.
Absolutely.
Well, I think that was outstanding. Do you have any questions you want to ask her? Because you just got here.
I did just get here. I apologize.
We were very much into a conversation about what she does and who she is and why she does what she does. And we talked about her education, how much education that she has. There is a question that I did want to lead up to. So if someone else, a young person like myself, if they wanted to get involved in what you do, what road or journey would you have them take? Give them advice, like your mentor did for you.
If they wanted to get into politics or
politics, treasury. I mean, with politics is, you know, politics basically is the how you allocate resources is pretty much that's what politics is about. And the treasurer, you get to do a lot of allocating resources. So yeah.
My argument would be I believe firmly that it is important to understand the role of process in policy. With any policy, I don't care what it is, the devil is in the details. You can have the best idea in the world, but if it is executed in a train wreck, then it's not going to matter. You could have an idea that people aren't real fond of, but it might solve a basic root cause to a problem in a way that has unbelievable impact. And I'll give you an example. So when we were working with Mr. O'Neill, one of the things we were looking at is the mortality rate for people that had heart surgery in the United States, which was very, very high. So we wanted to look at the data to see why in the United States we had a higher mortality rate post-cardiac surgery. And we isolated data from post-op reports. But we had to tell the doctors, we're not going to allow this to be used for lawsuits or anything. So if you have a patient that dies, we need what's called a blame-free environment where you give us data. We know you didn't try to hurt anybody. We know you didn't want to kill anybody. We just need to figure out what's happening. And because we created a safe space for doctors to provide post-op information, we isolated the data and we found something fascinating. And that was when we isolated data by race or gender or anything else, we didn't see any particular correlation with death. But when we isolated it by body weight, the more you weighed, the less likely you were to die. And it was a straight line. And we were trying to figure out.
I'm sorry. You said the more you weigh, the less likely you were to die?
Yep. And I'm going to tell you why.
Yeah.
Because when you have cardiac surgery and they stop your heart, they have to start it again and they have to prime it with a saline solution. When they were putting that solution in people's bloodstream, they were using the same amount for every person, which meant the smaller you were, the more your blood volume diluted, the less likely you were to clot, and the more likely you were to experience infections and post-cardiac complications. So what they did was they created an algorithm for how much saline you use, and they sent it out to every hospital in the country saying, now correlate this by body weight. But through that process, they solved one major root cause of cardiac surgery death. That is true systemic problem solving. There was no cap. Now everybody was saying, oh, we need to put more money in, we need computers, no, you're not understanding how to do true scientific problem solving at root cause. And those are the kind of things that I learned. So if I were to tell anybody that wants to get into government, I would say, learn a lean system. Learn one of them, mine was Toyota, the Toyota production system, but there's Six Sigma, there's all of these lean systems. And I cannot stress enough, if you are going to work in a large, complex, adaptive system like a hospital or a government, please go and get some sort of lean systems training, because it will completely change the way you see the entire world. That was the most inspiring and revolutionizing thing that I ever encountered, was learning that.
Well, on a personal note, I would like to see more African Americans get involved with it, especially when we talk about the medical field and we talk about treatment. Everybody's a little different, and I don't get into the black and the white thing because that's something that's constructed. But a zebra is a zebra, and a horse is a horse, and they're different, right? They may be in the same family, but they're different, so you have to treat them differently. I say that is that the more African Americans that we have in there, then maybe we can have more clinical trials about what works for me that doesn't work for her or doesn't work for him.
Yeah.
You understand? Because the way they do it now, everything is routine. Routine. But what may work for you may not work for me. Okay?
Yeah. And as somebody that started out in mental health and drug and alcohol treatment, I started out at Pittsburgh Black Action, which was obviously, there was people of all races there, but it was largely a Black population. And the first caseload I had was 35 men, and they were all Vietnam veterans of color. So that was an unbelievable experience to hear them talk about what that was like and the level of racism and dehumanization they experienced in the war, because they weren't treated like the white soldiers were.
Oh.
They were very much treated like less than human.
Yep.
And the things that they were put through and asked to do were unbelievably dehumanizing. And so that really taught me a lot. And just listening to what they went through, because I had never seen anything like that. And our treatment model was very controversial when the doctor that started it began it, because he felt that the way we were doing treatment was basically, it was designed to help people with means, with all this support around them, with a financial structure around them, with the job. It wasn't designed to help lift people up who had a history in the war or had criminal justice system involvement or grew up with very little means or very little education and were struggling. And so they designed it. That was like the original methadone maintenance program, because the idea was, let's get you at least to a point where you're not on an illicit substance and something that is controlled, and get you stabilized. And then maybe we can help to build a life around you. So yeah, seeing what recovery was like in some of the fancier facilities versus what Pittsburgh Black Action was like, and seeing just a whole level of barriers to reentry for those folks was unbelievable. I mean, what they were trying to overcome was astronomical, and some days it seemed insurmountable.
Let me tell you. So Hope, what she does is she also works as she works with a lot of children because she works in the school system, and she also works with mental health patients. So she's right on cue with you when it comes to talking about the mental health and how we're being treated in this society. African Americans, women, or those that are considered to be minority, migrants, and so forth and so on. She can get into it.
I actually do have a question for you, Erin. Going back to your data-driven philosophies.
Yeah.
I am a social worker, and we're in the human services, so a lot of people don't equate that with having strong backgrounds in research and data. And I mean, we live by those standards, whether it's qualitative or quantitative.
Yeah.
And I'm a huge research geek. But my question to you is, how do you feel our state legislature handles data? Like, are the bills that are coming out, or what we're doing, is it more emotion driven or is it data driven? I know when I ran nonprofits and you're receiving grant money, which is like the Treasury, there are certain standards you have to meet, and you have to continue to show that the money that you're getting is making a difference by giving your numbers. So what's your opinion on that with the legislature?
Yeah, I think that we've fallen way off. First of all, we don't have subject matter experts in the legislature. Like, even 15 years ago, I can name to you different legislators that were subject matter experts in different areas. And I remember a few years ago, there was a bill going through the legislature that, and this, we don't compel disclosure of confidential information in substance abuse. There's a federal law that we follow, and that is exercised as an adult at the age of 14. A 14-year-old in treatment is treated as an adult, and their confidentiality is protected. There has never been a law in the state of Pennsylvania that required a counselor to betray the confidence of their patient until the past few years. There was a law put forward, and it said that a counselor for the first time was obligated, if a patient left treatment AMA, they were obligated to inform whoever they had a release for. Well, sometimes that's an abusive husband.
Right.
And always, if they have criminal justice activity, then they have a release for a PO, right? So there's if they're in treatment, then they have to sign a release for their parole or probation officer, so we can say, yes, they're coming to treatment and this. Well, what I would do is, if somebody, kind of disappeared from treatment for a few days and went AMA, our work was to get them back.
Right, exactly.
Get you back. If this law is passed and I am legally mandated to pick up the phone and tell a criminal justice advocate, that is completely contradictory to everything that we have been taught. Everything that I believed in is an activist for criminal justice reform, as well as an advocate for recovering people, and my obligation to my patient. That is my obligation, to do what is best for them. And I don't ever see a time when getting them back in the criminal justice system and incarcerating them for relapse is a good move. No. But yet we passed a law that did that very thing. And people that were criminal justice reform advocates passed it. And it was because somebody somewhere, their loved one left treatment and passed away due to relapse. So now we're just going to blow up the entire system and take away people's confidentiality and protections. And it was very, very poorly conceived for emotionally charged reasons and for performative reasons. But it was a bad move for the overhaul of criminal justice reform. It's not where we should be going. And I was very aggressive in speaking out against that. And I also remind people, a lot of the treatment industry now has moved more toward a for-profit, corporatized approach. Back when I was at Pittsburgh Black Action, we were activists.
Right.
Like, we were activists. So it's shifted a lot to a more for-profit, corporatized rendition that doesn't really advocate for the rights of our patients or their safety or their well-being.
And part of the reason that has come about is due to lack of funding.
Correct.
So who deals with the resources?
Well, that's the legislature.
Or the distribution of resources, that would be the treasury.
No, the legislature writes the budget, and the budget decides where money goes. A lot of that funding is federal. and then some of it is state. So you have both of those sources. The single county authorities do funding that's the public funding for drug and alcohol, which is restrictive because if you're from Allegheny, but you have a substance abuse arrest in Armstrong, it gets very difficult because of where the offense happened versus where you live and who pays for that.
Right.
So the way it's structured is very antiquated and not very effective. It's based on service, not qualitative outcomes. So that's been dynamic.
Hold on to that thought in 1 second. Thank you for tuning in to GenesisRadio.com. Generally, you can give us a call at 888-304-4401, or you can check us out on Facebook Live. We are on Facebook Live, GenesisRadio.com. Again, thank you again. Thank you, young lady. You can continue with your thought. I'm sorry about that.
No, that's okay. You have to do station identification. I understand. No, just overall, I think that a lot of our system is very antiquated in Pennsylvania when it comes to substance abuse and mental health. And I just don't think that we're moving forward the way research and data in healthcare is showing that we should by any means.
I agree. And I mean, people that know me in my personal life, I'm a very silly person, fun, goofy, what have you. But now when we start talking professional, now I'm all business. You know, it's all about logic. It's all about data. It's all about, moving forward and doing the right thing in a research-driven way, which is what we're not doing.
Sure.
But just to get back to a little bit of money things, this has always been on my mind about Social Security. Now, can that be dealt with at the state level? As far as maybe people don't, like at a certain age, I mean, we shouldn't have to continue to pay taxes because you pay taxes going in, you pay taxes coming out. And it just really doesn't seem fair. I mean, I paid FICA for as long as I worked, and that was a good 40 years or so that I worked. I put a lot of money into FICA, and now that I get a Social Security check, they consider that to be earned income. So here I got to pay taxes on it again. Just doesn't seem right.
Yeah, Social Security is entirely a federal program, so it's all done through the federal government. But what I can tell you is, for years we had an issue with money being taken out, borrowed essentially out of Social Security. And the way Mr. O'Neill put it is we leave IOUs in their place. And he felt that he told George Bush when he was the Treasury Secretary, I'm going to account for those IOUs. I'm going to add them all up. I'm going to add interest, and I'm going to put them on the nation's balance sheet as a debt to the people that needs to be paid back to that fund. And I said, now that's what a true honest broker in a government position should do. And I have said I would do the same thing for the teacher's pension. For years, the state legislature did not pay the annual required contribution that they were required to pay into the teacher's pension. Now, in the year 2000, that teacher's pension was overfunded. It was in good shape. And then they just bled it dry. And then now it's underfunded. There's all kinds of issues. We don't do cost of living adjustment. We have teachers getting a pension that's about $18,000 a year. And we're constantly seeing an attack on public sector pensions. I want to figure out the amount of the annual required contribution that is still owed to our teachers, and it is owed. This is not an entitlement program. It should be paid back, and it should be paid back with interest. But we have to create that number so that way people can run for state legislature or run for governor on the idea of we're going to get you that money back.
So when they borrow this money that we just talked about, like they borrow the money from Social Security, who borrows it and where does it go? Because I know prior to what was it, Reagan, we didn't pay Social Security taxes. So where did the money? What are they doing with the money? If they're taking the money out of Social Security and leaving an IOU, then where's the money going?
Yeah, they're paying other bills with it, and it should be, basically they're padding the nation's balance sheet with revenue that they shouldn't be using it. It should be sitting there, earning interest, doing what it's supposed to do. So it's there for our Social Security recipients and our retirees when they're ready to retire. And we keep borrowing it and moving it around to pay other bills. And we have a huge national debt. Like those are all things that are expenses we take on. And so we robbed Social Security for a long time, and we did dissolve the fund. That was the other thing that Mr. O'Neill was appalled by, is there's not actually a fund. It just kind of hangs out in there. So there's some pretty significant issues with Social Security. But like I said, it's purely a federal program.
And
Yeah,
I find it fascinating, though, that the Republican Party is always looking to dismantle Social Security, and I feel that it has something to do with the fact that of all of the money that is owed to it.
Yeah, but it's
that
funny.
would just disappear. And I feel that it's the same at the state level here in Pennsylvania with our education system. It's no secret that, you know, the Republican Party is trying to dismantle public education, and that would wipe out that debt. Then, so I mean, there's more behind the scenes than
Yeah, there's a lot of
think.
nuances. There's always nuances, but I was just thinking. I had a thought that when they gave these tax breaks to people who really didn't need it, they gave it way back. What was Reagan and those guys? They started it then, right? And it's just kind of kept going on and on and on. So now we're at a point where they gave all this money away to the rich people. So there's not enough money coming in. So we, as a taxpayer, we got to come out of our pockets to make up the difference, because you still, if you need $100, you need $100. Doesn't matter. If you say, well, you don't have to pay into it and you don't have to pay into it, that means everybody else got to kick in. So, because we still need that $100.
Yeah.
Right. So it just bothers the mind as to how we can keep giving these people who don't need the money. How can we keep giving them all kind of tax break? Because it's hurting us.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's sort of the fuzzy money management. So here's a great example of what you're describing. Because of what we did to the teacher's pension, because we underfunded it, because we wanted to move that money, not pay it there, and they put it in other places. What we did was we made it underfunded. So today, the resolution to that is 38% of every school district's payroll in this state goes to that pension fund. So when people are upset with their local electeds about how much their school taxes are, I want you to remember it's not just about what they're doing. It is about what the legislature did for years and has turned around. And that debt, which they took that money out, they turned around and they dumped it on the back of local electeds. And it's very easy to say, oh, well, it's all their problem. Again, just like the statewide property tax standard, dump it on the local electeds. And we need people running for local office that understand this. And it does get very complicated. And most of the people that are in elected office in Pennsylvania are not making a salary for it. They're doing it because they truly appreciate the importance of local government and getting their roads paved and potholes fixed and garbage picked up and snow removed. So that's how they look at it. And that's why it's so easy for the legislature to just dump all their problems on the local electeds. And that's one of the biggest ways that you've seen that tax structure move to the backs of local people in a way that nobody often realizes it.
You know, Jack Reeder, that's his name?
Rader.
Jack Rader, he was one of those advocates for raising our property taxes, wasn't he?
No, he when he ran in 2014, his sole promise was to provide property tax relief. So basically, you know, it was HB 76 back in the day that would eliminate property taxes. And I ran against him in 2014. And, you know, I was the bad person because I didn't support that bill. And what I didn't support about that bill is that it also erased property taxes for businesses. So if Mountain Springs Lake Resort is paying $90,000 a year in property tax that would go to the school district, that $90,000 is now gone. And I always was under the assumption or belief or desire that property tax relief is for homeowners, not businesses.
And
Like
now,
you said, we give them enough
we
breaks.
give them enough breaks. I think so. I think it's time for maybe us to get a break somewhere down the line somewhere. Okay, ladies.
I have a question, Aaron. Let's a different topic.
Go ahead.
Is that okay?
Go ahead.
All right. So my district is very diverse with our voter registration, and I've noticed one of the topics when I'm speaking with especially third-party voters is the legalization of recreational marijuana. And I had a great conversation just a few months ago with a gentleman who owns a vape and tobacco store. And I asked him, super knowledgeable guy, I asked him what the pitfalls would be for a business owner, small business owner such as himself, if we legalize recreational marijuana. And his concerns was not the legalization of it, but how it would be done, because right now we know with dispensaries, if you don't have like $1 million bond, you're not getting a dispensary. So clearly that leaves out the mom and pop businesses that are already kind of having these, vape shops, and they have the CBD and things like that. So what his biggest concern was that the little guy was going to get cut out. The little and again, our middle class, our small businesses are getting cut out of the picture. So Aaron, if recreational marijuana were to be legalized, like what do you think that would look like on a financial end for the state? Like, how do you think the state would get involved in that?
Good question.
I honestly don't know what they would do, because they've definitely not demonstrated a real strong penchant for really doing full legalization. And I know that like there's definitely a difference between legalizing, a production process and like homegrown, when people are just like doing it in their backyard. So there's that dynamic as well. And I haven't seen any policies on how we would set it up as a business structure. So I'm not really sure what we're looking at. But what we do know is that we wouldn't have to keep that money separate in the treasury anymore if it was legalized across the board. Especially what we really need is federal.
Right. Yeah, right.
That's where that needs to happen. You can do it at the state level, but it's going to be a lot easier if it's done at the federal level. And second of all, there's going to be a lot of tax revenue developed from that, and
Right.
That's what we're missing out on, is the tax revenue. When you look at sin taxing things like anything like that, there's always a lot to gain by it. Keep it legalized, keep it controlled, and definitely bring revenue in on it.
Yeah, I believe he had stated it's like a 40% tax on his property.
What I would tell you, buddy, is to maybe look at New York City and take a blueprint from there.
Yeah.
Because you can go just about any street corner, any bodega, the nearest store, you can purchase marijuana.
Right, but it's recreational marijuana isn't legal here in Pennsylvania.
That's what I mean. If it becomes legal here.
Oh, gotcha. Okay, I see where you're going.
And then he can follow the same
Sure.
as
Oh yeah, I think his concern more so, he's got a great business and a great business plan, is if the state, legalizes it, what's the state going to impose on his business? Is it going to be like our the LCB with the liquor licenses? Are there only going to be a certain amount distributed in each county? So I mean, he definitely had a lot of questions.
Well, one thing I could tell you about the marijuana situation, as far as how it's been treated, it's been pretty much treated the same as alcohol. It's been given pretty much the same rules and regulations. If you're drinking while you're smoking, right? You can't smoke outside. Even when they have recreational marijuana, you can't walk around the street smoking a joint. It's the same with drinking alcohol. You can't. So I think it's going to probably follow the same guidelines as rules as alcohol. That's what I think it is. All right, ladies. Thank you very much for tuning in. We really appreciate you coming on. I really, really appreciate you coming on. Tell Mr. Laws we said hello, and thank you for being a friend of the show, of the radio station. Young lady, again, thank you very much for being a friend of the station. It's always good to have you come in and sit down and have a chit chat with us. Okay, so my name is Kendall Stevenson. This is The Empowerment Show. Thank you again for tuning in. Tune in next week. Same time, same bat channel. We like to say peace.